Will money from Proposition 30 cure the state's budget problems? And will the growing economy take the state out of danger? A new approach to ridding California of air pollution. It's called cap and trade, and it's under legal attack, an assessment of how it works or doesn't. Techies say the election was won or lost in the digital realm, but not everyone agrees.
What do we want?
And an in-depth look at the fight over public nudity in San Francisco. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Spencer Michaels. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight, Marisa Lagos, San Francisco Chronicle City Hall reporter. Hari Srinivasan, senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Lauren Sommer, KQED Science and Environment reporter. And Josh Richmond, Bay Area News Group political reporter. Josh, let's start with you. All of a sudden, it seems like California, which was in the depths, is now rolling in money. There are more taxes. We passed Proposition 30. I can't believe there's that much of a turnaround. Is there?
Well, there is a turnaround. I wouldn't say we're rolling in money. I've never seen a state so happy to have a $1.9 billion deficit over the next year and a half. But that's basically where we're at. Now, you have to look at that deficit, even though it's the size of Wyoming's entire budget. In the context of a $42 billion deficit and then the $26 billion deficit, we've worn it down over time. And with the passage of Prop 30 last week, we have money coming in for the next several years to support education, K-12 education, college education, and also to help out balancing out some of the money that's needed by counties for the realignment of the criminal justice system.
Well, do you think Prop 30 was the main reason that the deficit is lower, or is it the fact that the economy is improving and there's more taxes?
Well, I think the LAO's estimate of a $1.9 billion deficit, legislative analyst, the estimate of that $1.9 billion deficit through June 2014 would have been about $6 billion higher if we hadn't passed Prop 30 last week. That said, there are still a lot of things that the state needs to do, and the governor is out there very aggressively telling people to be very careful over the next few years. We have Democratic supermajorities in both houses of the legislature right now, so there's a temptation to go and fix all that was damaged in the last several years of very deep budget cutting. The governor is out there preaching temperance, and I do mean preaching.
But is anybody preaching the other side? Is anybody saying, let's spend our money?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the interest groups are lining up saying restore our cuts, and I think that in the out years, yes, it's the recovering economy and these taxes that are going to help. In the short term, it's really the fact that they have made these deep cuts to social services, to medical services.
Education.
Education, yes, although education at least stays whole now. You know, the programs, the adult day health care, for example, and the welfare that they cut in the past years, those aren't getting any more money out of this tax hike. And so those are the people that now the governor and the Democratic leaders are going to have to be fending off.
Right.
And I think it's going to be hard for them.
It is going to be hard.
What are the big problems that remain? I read several articles this week that said, you know, don't take this too seriously. There are lots of problems in California, and they mentioned pensions as the main one.
Pensions is definitely one of them. Something's going to need to be done sooner rather than later about the California Teachers Pension Fund, CalSTRS. It's got some serious unfunded liabilities. It really extends all over the budget. I mean, the governor was out there very aggressively telling the UC and CSU systems this week, the public universities, to be very careful. They are both asking for more money in the budgets that they've just passed than they got last year. And he is telling them that they have to find ways to continue to cut costs so as not to have to raise student fees. The students are very adamant about that as well.
Are we going to see a lot of tension there, though? Because they were out campaigning for Prop 30 a lot, and they're certainly looking to kind of get that money to come back to them.
Yeah, no, it's not that the money may not come back to them. It's that they shouldn't be planning on wine and roses for every year going forward. That there has to be a very studied approach to that while we're dealing with things like pensions and
Well,
restoration
they
of
were
social
talking
services.
About, they were
and-
talking about increasing tuitions right after Prop 30
But
passed.
this is the problem with ballot box budgeting, is that you have to go out and sell people on something that's not exactly what it seems. What Prop 30 did was give extra money to schools that now they can kind of offset what the state's obligation was otherwise to schools. It didn't give universities extra money. It stopped them from being cut more this year.
Right.
And so that's, I think, all you hear on the campaign trail is, oh, this is about schools, it's about higher education. It is, but it's not about them suddenly getting, buckets full of money.
But it was about other things too, Prop 30. It wasn't just about schools and higher education. It was about reducing the debt and a bunch of things.
Well, it was predominantly about not having to make that $6 billion in automatic trigger cuts, which was built into the budget that we're already in right now.
Right.
And so that will not come to pass. We will not see a shortening of the school year. We will not see an instant wholesale raising of fees.
And I, as somebody who's covered criminal justice, have to bring up, it also gave locals the guarantee that they're going to keep getting the money for realignment, the governor's criminal justice reform, which sent a lot of responsibility for inmates and parolees back to the counties. That's in the Constitution now. Legislatures cannot touch that, and that's big because that would have been a huge hit locally. And when you talk about pensions, I mean, those are the bigger problems that are kind of coming to a head in the next decades are the local obligations on those things.
I'm also wondering whether Prop 30 took the pressure off in trying to actually make significant deep reform. And,
Well, I think we've made some very significant deep reforms in the sense that the structural budget deficit that we've had in recent years is essentially gone at this point going forward. We're looking at this $1.9 billion deficit through June 2014 and then projected surpluses for some years after that. That's no mean feat. This budget is a lot smaller now, a lot smaller than it was when this crisis began several years ago.
and these
in
estimates
terms
are
of,
still based on a recovery.
they're still based on something of a recovery, and frankly, some of the new figures are very positive. There were new job figures out today in California that showed good job numbers for this month, amended better numbers for last month. A lot of it driven by companies here in the Bay Area. So there is some path forward. It looks like at this point.
Okay, so we're gonna move to another political subject, kind of. But first, we're just gonna tell everybody that Dan Lundgren conceded defeat today, by the way, in his race with Ami Bera for the congressional seat in the Sacramento area. It's probably the end of a career for a guy who's been in politics for a very long time. Let's talk about cap and trade. This week marked the beginning of an auction for cap and trade. And Lauren Sommer, tell us what that was about and why it's a big deal. It's sort of a mystery to a lot of people.
Right, I know, it sounds kind of wonky, but what it is the most ambitious climate change policy in the country. Now, this goes back to 6 years ago when former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger passed AB 32, which is the landmark global warming law in the state. And it has a huge goal, which is to cut the state's greenhouse gas emissions 30% by 2020 from a business as usual.
Why do we give Schwarzenegger the credit for that? I mean, he didn't pass it, the legislature.
Okay, well, we'll give him that credit. But it's a huge feat, and there's a number of programs, but this week what started was a program called Cap and Trade, and it applies to oil refineries, manufacturers, food processors. Polluters.
Okay, so you brought some props with you.
I brought
that
some.
We're gonna show how cap and trade works. So let's bring out the props and try to figure out how do you cut pollution in a state where there's a lot of industry and a lot of oil refineries and cement companies. So what do you got here?
Yeah, so, well, first let's start with the cap part of cap and trade, okay? So this is an overall limit on the greenhouse gases that can be emitted in this state. And over the years, it's gonna drop a little bit. So that's how they're getting the cuts. Now the trading part, we're gonna do a little demo. You guys are gonna help me, right?
Harry's gonna help too.
Right.
Okay, so let's say, Spencer, you are gonna be an oil refinery. You are a power plant.
All right.
You both emit greenhouse gases, right? And so,
All right.
and so since you're both businesses, we're going to give you a little bit of money here. We've got monopoly money.
Okay.
You gave him more.
Those are the facts.
And so now, under cap and trade, you're going to need carbon permits. So they're what they call allowances. And basically, each of these poker chips is going to be 1 ton of carbon. And after a certain number of years, you're going to need to have enough of these to cover every ton of greenhouse gases that you emit. And so at the beginning at least, the state is going to give you almost all of your allowances for free.
I like free. This is
here's
good.
your allowances.
Fantastic.
So with each one of these, I can emit a ton of carbon.
That's your carbon right there.
But what if I don't want? What do I want to really clean up my plant? So
That's one of the options, is that you can invest a little bit early on, upgrade your technology, so hypothetically you'd be emitting fewer greenhouse gases.
Okay, so I'm going to spend $500 and I'm going to improve my plant.
Right.
Okay?
That means you probably won't need this entire stack of poker chips. You may have a few extras now because you cut your emissions.
Okay, so I'm going to not use 4 poker chips, but he's going to keep polluting, right?
Right. So I'm gonna try to buy some of those credits off you. Let me offer you $300.
And I want more. I want 500,
All right, 350.
400.
All right, fine. 400. That's a deal.
All right. There we
And this
go.
is exactly what we're going to see, right? No one's really sure what the price of carbon is going to be. It's going to be a market.
And how is that going to reduce why don't we just say don't pollute anymore instead of all
Give a
this
hoot,
hocus
don't pollute. Yeah,
pocus?
that works.
The idea of cap and trade is to give businesses flexibility. So just what we saw right here, you had choices. And it's going to be cheaper for some companies to cut than others. So the idea is to find the most efficient companies and do the cuts there and incentivize it in a market.
Now, what's the role of the state in it? It sounds to me like the state is trying to sell these things here.
Yeah, I mean, at first, mostly they'll go for free, but then there will be auctions where companies will have to buy allowances on the open market. That money, it's going to raise billions of dollars, and that money is going to go towards energy efficiency, and it's going to go towards helping homeowners, ratepayers,
But
people
why
that buy
doesn't
electricity.
why doesn't the state say stop polluting instead of selling you permission to pollute?
Yeah, so the cap will come down. The overall greenhouse gas emissions from the state will come down. That's where they're getting the cuts, but they don't care where the cuts come from. Some companies will pollute more than others.
So the Chamber of Commerce is already suing, saying that the auction isn't legal. What was it?
Yes, they were challenging the state's right to collect revenue from selling allowances. They didn't think that was legal. And they're not against the cap and they're not against the trading, is what they say. It's the state making money from it.
So couldn't that be where maybe we see this 2/3 legislative majority matter in Sacramento? I mean, couldn't they say, fine, it's not a fee, it's a tax, and then the money could go to anything? Is that possible?
It's a lot of money. It certainly is. It's billions of dollars, over the years. Some of it is legislated already. Some of it's going to go towards communities that are already impacted by pollution. So some of it will have to be spent there.
When you say it's billions of dollars, though, what do you mean it's billions of dollars?
So that the state will actually be collecting from the sale of these allowances.
They're going to make that much money.
But most of it is already spoken for. It's going to go towards clean energy. It's going to go towards energy efficiency programs. And then it's going to go, some of it will actually help reduce electricity rates for homeowners that otherwise may be rising because of cap and trade.
So eventually, do the companies that can't stop polluting just go out of business? Is that sort of the idea?
I mean, you talk to different sides, they have different opinions about this. I mean, it's really a revolutionary thing to put a price on carbon. That's kind of the whole idea behind this, is to make businesses feel it in their bottom line. But I think it's safe to say there will be winners and losers. And the state has said we want to see clean energy grow in this state, and this is what's going to help do it.
You say it's revolutionary, though, but it's been done before. It's been done in Europe, right?
It has been done in Europe. For several years now, they have a very large carbon trading scheme. And some people say it's been very successful. It has had some problems. California's saying they've learned from that, and they're going to design this market to be more efficient.
Okay. Well, it's a complicated system, and we're going to talk about another complicated system here. Hari Srinivasan, there's a lot of new information about how the digital world helped in the last campaign and maybe made a big difference.
Right.
You've been looking into that. Tell me about it.
So, what's interesting is this is the first time that campaigns had access to not just all of the 500 points of consumer data about you that already exist. This time they were able to combine it with all of your online surfing behavior and really start to micro-target. And both campaigns, neither campaign really wanted to talk about it until after the election. And we're getting little dribs and drabs of information on exactly what they built in their storehouses.
You produced a report for the NewsHour and for Frontline about this, and we're going to see a little bit of that right now.
The ability to predict voter behavior is what makes all of this data so powerful. Once the campaigns collect all of this seemingly random information about us, they feed it into sophisticated mathematical formulas called algorithms, which are used to predict voter behavior. The more information fed into these models, the better a campaign can predict what issues particular voters might care about. or what type of ads they would be most receptive to. For example, an Ohio male, registered Democrat who votes primaries, owns a shotgun, visits the Wall Street Journal website, might swing Republican and be susceptible to ads about gun control. Or a Florida female who's registered independent with children under 18 years old and is a pet owner may lean Democrat and be susceptible to ads about education issues.
Very cool graphics.
Thank you.
Very,
There was
very
more to that report than the graphics, but yes.
Right, and it was an interesting report. Who used this technique?
Both campaigns used this pretty aggressively. The Obama campaign probably more so because they had a head start. They knew who their candidate was going to be, and they've been working on this for years.
And is it all legal? I mean, how do they know all this stuff about me?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Is so much of the information we generate today, we're opting to share that on Facebook and all these social networks. We leave this huge digital trail wherever we go about our shopping behavior online in a way we might not do in the offline world.
So basically, you're only targeting or finding out about people who are on Facebook and on Twitter and in the social media.
No.
And the old folks or people who are on the other side of the digital divide, we don't know very much about them.
Well, no, I think those folks are still targeted the old-fashioned way, right? Publishers Clearinghouse sold you down the river a long time ago when you decided to subscribe to Guns and Ammo or Cat Fancy. So they've built profiles on us, and now they're just actually targeting us even more.
So it seems like everybody talks a lot about social media and how does that influence voter behavior, but it seems like this is really where the money's at for campaigns, right? I mean, because my Facebook page is probably made up of people sort of like me, and you're kind of preaching to the choir in a way.
Yeah.
But this lets them kind of come in and really target households, individual people within this household.
Yeah, in fact, you can have two people in the same house see different kinds of advertising. That was never possible with TV, right? You'd have to buy 50 TV ads and you never knew who actually saw it and who was moved by which.
How do they see it? On their computers?
Right, so if you're online and there's a chance that you have created a digital profile of yourself, they're going to target that profile, just like we kind of split those two things up and say, okay, I just want to reach this person. And there is a massive Facebook effect. I mean, in the last election, Facebook was able to turn out an extra 340,000 people to the polls. This time, Facebook has figured out that 1 in 5 people responded and reacted to a plea from one of their friends to go out.
And there's a lot of, I was going to say, I mean, there's a very viral effect here because not only are they targeting voters, but they're targeting people who can contact other people they know to carry the message forward. So California may not be in play in the presidential election, but they're going to have you call your cousin in Ohio to get them to vote.
But there are some
way.
people who don't completely buy this theory.
Okay.
Micah Sifry at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government doesn't believe that any digital outlet had any noticeable effect on the course of the election. Instead, they fostered superficial dialogue, he says. The politicians got a little internet buzz for their appearances, the tech companies got some cheap marketing, and with a few exceptions, the political reporters who cover the election campaign went merrily along for the ride.
Okay.
He's doubting what
Oh,
you're
no,
talking
that's fantastic. I'm glad he does, because I really think that he can't really argue with the efficiency of the amount of television advertising, right? So, for example, the Obama campaign actually sat there and figured out which persuadable voters to get and what types of ads to run in which markets more efficiently, right? So they can measure that and say, I actually spent my dollars 14% better than if I didn't have these tracking tools. Right? He can't argue with the fact that there are twice as many people on social media between 2008 and 2012. 2/3 of those people on Twitter actually actively asked their friends to take some sort of political action. So those kind of facts are kind of indisputable. Ultimately, you can't ever measure whether your voter or your target went and pulled the lever exactly.
But it seems like a huge part of it was actually getting this information in the hands of field volunteers, the apps, the kind of things people were taking door to door, and they were actually collecting information.
Absolutely. Right? So I had both the Obama and the Romney apps on my phone, and it was amazing the volume of information that I had. Literally, if I wanted to go and canvass for a Democrat, I could sit there and know first name, last initial, age. I'd knock on their door and there'd be a little script. Hello, Spencer M. And then, the script might have been tailored based on other information that Chicago, so to speak, had on you.
Well, this seems like it's, again, like not that different from what we've done in the past, just using different technology. So I still get the mailers at my house that are targeting me because of how I'm, what district I'm in, how I'm registered, what they know about me, like you said, what we're subscribing to, other things.
Right.
They just have more information now.
There was a great New York Times Magazine article a while back saying that Target knew you were pregnant before you did, right?
Yeah.
Based
Because
on
apparently I'm a huge
This
new
whole
market.
thing is very scary, isn't it?
No pun intended.
I don't know whether this sounds so good.
Well, it just depends on I think
you
that-
are.
Right. It depends on who you are, but also I think that more information is better in the sense that if you're aware that this is happening, perhaps you can take a couple of steps to do something about it. Know that you're a pawn in somebody else's chess game. That is different than saying, well, I don't really think I'm being targeted. You are. And this is, about 900,000 people decided this election, about 12 or 15 counties around the country. And that's where $1 billion each was spent. And it's just sad.
So you
Karl
weren't
Rove
targeted.
feel about this?
I was
Well,
targeted.
we weren't in the
No,
Bay
I'm a,
Area,
yeah, I'm
right?
a registered independent in a battleground state of Virginia, so I had a
You
huge
don't have
bullseye.
to tell us that.
No.
We already knew.
Oh,
Okay, well, all right. From the sublime to we'll talk about nudity. Right?
We'll go very local.
Marisa Lagos of the San Francisco Chronicle has a big issue about nudity in San Francisco and
Yeah.
whether people can walk around naked. Why is that an issue?
Well, and that's what I think the issue is here. It's not that it's an only in San Francisco issue. It's the way it plays out is very only in San Francisco. So in the last few years, we've had this sort of increase of mostly men hanging out in the Castro district, the city's sort of historically gay district, and literally hanging out. They are just sitting in a public square naked. And in California, nudity, as long as it's not lewd or obscene, is technically legal. But that's generally been taken to mean that you can't really be nude unless you're, say, at a beach or somewhere where it's sort of tailored. And last year, the Board of Supervisors here passed a law saying, okay, fine, you can be nude, but you can't do it in a restaurant, and you got to put something between your buttocks and a seat before you do it. That didn't seem to help, and there's been a lot of outcry. So on Tuesday, the board will consider legislation to ban nudity. Now, it would stay legal at street festivals, fairs, parades, if you're under the age of 5, at the beach, and it would also it would only include sort of waist down nudity.
So the display,
That's a lot of exceptions.
Yeah, exactly. So we
the
don't, because we don't
protest,
want
though, the protest occurred in front of the federal building.
Well,
What's
so
going
we've had
on
several
here?
protests against this legislation, and this week a group of nudists came out and marched from City Hall over to the federal building across the street to file a federal lawsuit challenging this law, but it's not a law yet. So basically what's going to happen is the board's going to have to pass this, the mayor will have to sign it. It wouldn't go into effect probably until January, and then potentially it could be put on hold by a federal.
This is not a case that really has a real strong legal precedent, right?
No, the Supreme Court's decided at least twice that nudity on its own is not a
Free
form of
speech.
protest, of free speech. That's what they're essentially arguing. And so I think that the real debate, it could be a fun day at the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday, and we will continue to see this play out, but it doesn't seem like the lawsuit itself is
There
that.
are some people who are really upset about this issue, I think.
Yeah, there's about 10 of them. No, I mean, there might be more people. There is a very vocal group of supporters.
If you walk down Castro Street or any other street and you see a bunch of people hanging out with no clothes on, you might be shocked if you weren't expecting it.
Right, and there are some people that argue that it's actually drawing tourists to the Castro. But I think this speaks to the sort of changing demographic of the gay, not just neighborhood, but culture in this town. A lot of people there, it's not just a place people go to party. There are a lot of families. A lot of the groundswell of sort of opposition to this has come from the gay community who are saying, we're walking our kids to school, they don't need to see this. And business owners, I think, in the area have kind of mixed feelings.
So why did the thing all come up all of a sudden? A lot more people walking around naked?
Yes, I mean, that's really, it seems that, 3 or 5 years ago, it was really limited to like the parades and the Folsom Street fairs and the events where people kind of showed up to do this, and suddenly we just.
So is this a response to that sort of restriction on restaurants where they?
Well, no, the restriction on restaurants came after this movement. I think, honestly, we've seen these parklets sort of come up in the city where, areas taken back to become an open space, and I'm pretty sure that 1 or 2 people just started doing it, and it attracted other people.
Are you
Even
from-
Berkeley. Even
Even Berkeley,
had-
San Jose has these
Really?
laws.
Yeah.
Well, you're from Washington. You're out here on a little trip. What do you think of this? Is this an only in San Francisco story?
Well, I mean, yeah, quite possibly. It's just it's
Too cold in Washington.
There's that, but it's also interesting to see that the edges of the frame of this conversation are so far to the left that the screaming conservatives are the ones that want to restrict it just to these specific cases.
Right, and let's be clear here. It's expected to be a close vote at the board. This is an 11-member board. I talked to the author, Supervisor Scott Wiener, and he thinks it's going to be a 5 to 6 vote. And the argument being the sort of same argument we hear around sit-lie laws, that it's not necessary. It's really that there are ways that, things on the book that they can use already. But I think that comes down to this being a very liberal town and people not wanting to tell other people what to do.
You think this is a progressive issue?
I would say, I don't know. That's a loaded word in this town.
I know, that's why I asked it.
I think the progressives will be squarely against this, yes.
Okay, this is a fascinating kind of a thing, and we will find out what happens. Anyway, that's all for tonight. I want to thank all of you for being with us. It's been a lot of fun, so come back again. And visit kqed.org/thisweek for the show archives, to subscribe to the newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts. We're off next week for the Thanksgiving holiday. In the meantime, if you don't want turkey, you can enjoy Dungeness crab, because they're in at $3 a pound wholesale. I'm Spencer Michaels. Thanks for watching. Good night.